All right.
All right.
Hey, everybody.
Hey.
We wanted to make a little video kind of explaining what the internal strength model is and why we like it and how it's different from your standard training models.
Yeah. So if you're kind of curious about our program and you want to know what the internal strength model is, this is a really good primer on that. So basically, we have been doing strength and conditioning for a long time, popping out of CrossFit and then trying to improve on that, and then just sort of shifting into more of a classic style strength and conditioning. And definitely from that health perspective, we found FRC 7 years ago, started doing FRC and Kinstretch, but not exclusively. So it's not, I don't want you to think that this is just some other mobility program. This is basically what we consider to be the most sophisticated way to go about your strength training program. So this is strength training.
And hypertrophy training.
And hypertrophy training. There's a little bit of old time strongman in our program, which is not necessarily ISM at all. But what the ISM is it's basically just another way of looking at training, physical training. And it is not negating any of the research that's out there, really. It's just flipping the lens a little bit. So regular strength training is basically like, here's a series of exercises that you need to perform to strengthen the body or to develop muscle mass. Whereas,
which has worked over the years. The main problem, though, is that it doesn't take into consideration the actual functioning body parts that are doing these exercises. And if those are where they need to be, then those exercises can work really well. But if they aren't, those exercises may not go very well. And then the other side of that is when you're just doing those exercises repeatedly for a long time, you're actually losing some of those fundamental qualities that you need to have a healthy shoulder joint or spine or whatever we're talking about.
So the basic premise there is that you have to look at the body that you're training rather than just saying, well, here's a series of exercises, here you go, just whatever body, go do these exercises, and this is the correct form of this exercise. If you follow this correct form, you won't hurt yourself and everything will be fine. When in reality, you have, 7 different people, they all have a very different hip, and the optimal way to train that hip, for one person, following that perfect form might completely blow their hip up, give them back problems somewhere either immediately or way down the road if they're not training the deficits of that hip to be a better hip. Whereas somebody else might be pretty okay doing that and might fare much better. So you have to basically analyze the person. So in some ways, it really is an individual approach. Even if you do join the group program, we're trying to make it a more individualized process. But the goal is to analyze your body and look at your joints, and first ask that question is, do I have capsule space? If not, I need that first. What else am I lacking? And then how does that match up to what I want to do? And so what we want to do with our program is strength and conditioning, basically. Strength training / hypertrophy training with a little sprinkling of some, old-time strongman and some bodybuilding.
Fun stuff.
Yeah, classic stuff. But what we're doing is trying to train all of the tissues of the body. We're trying to analyze deficits, but we're also trying to optimize the functioning of those joints and tissues. Do you want to take over?
Yeah, I'm ready. Yeah, I mean,
Feel it.
A really good way to think about it is that even though our goals are strength and hypertrophy and some, different, exciting, like old-time strongman stuff, there's a huge focus on just developing healthy body parts, which is a much different focus than what you normally get in programs. And the beauty of doing that is that if you pursue training a joint, a healthy hip joint, and all of those qualities that make a healthy hip joint, your hip gets really good at doing pretty much whatever you want. So it just makes it work better when you do those exercises. It makes them a lot more sustainable. It gives you access to more tissue to make strength and hypertrophy gains. I mean, it really is, it's pretty much the main quality that's missing from every training program that's following that more standard model, because that stuff just isn't taking into account how to develop healthier body parts. And we've all kind of just been somewhat misled thinking that if I just squat 5 sets of 5 a week or whatever, that I'm going to take care of all the requirements that my hip needs and my knees, and that just isn't the case. So this resolves that problem.
And I think that, what we've started to identify in the years that we've been working with people is that a lot of these exercises that help you get stronger and put on muscle mass, while kind of in an isolated sense seem healthy, that they're not healthy to do long term unless you're going back in and doing the maintenance to undo the negatives that they're causing. So there's a positive gain, there's a strength, and there's hypertrophy, which are positives from a health standpoint, but there's also a negative, whereas you're tightening things up. And when you start tightening and tightening and tightening down on a capsule and then loading that repetitively with heavy weights, you're going to start damaging that capsule. So we need to go in and make sure that the capsule is healthy, and not only is it maintaining space, but that it's also strong. So you want to build all of those qualities that you're trying to get in strength and conditioning, not only into the linear tissues. So if you look at an internal strength model program, there's what we call a workflow, and the last stuff that you're working on are the big muscles, which all of the
things that we're all used to training.
Right, the stuff you can see that you're like, I want to bigger this, I want to bigger that, yada yada. The stuff underneath that is of vital importance, but it's also being completely neglected in a regular strength and conditioning program. There's very little rotational training. It is, if it's kind of haphazard, if it is, and usually seen as an accessory movement. While those movements that you're doing will use some rotation, it is not an optimal way to train your rotators because they're never being trained to full length. And we're realizing with all the research we're doing on regular exercises, like the optimal way to train your glutes, which is such a huge debate and field and everybody's so obsessed with it, then you can't go say that the optimal way to train a rotator is by not doing the same thing, which is you have to train multiple ranges of that tissue, basically. So this workflow essentially addresses capsule tissue, it addresses rotational tissue, it addresses linear tissue, and then there's
connective
movement.
tissue.
Right, and then within all of that, it's what kind of tissue. There's muscle tissue that's trained in a specific way. There's connective tissue that's trained in a different way. There's neurological stuff, and then there's the actual joint and bone stuff. So all of those have optimal ways to be trained, and they shouldn't be neglected. And traditional strength and conditioning very much so focuses on muscle to the detriment of or to the neglect of the other stuff, which usually, again, leads you down a road of short-term success, long-term failure, because that stuff, if you're loading muscle tissue into bad connective tissue scaffolding, it's not going to go great for a long period of time. So, yeah, that's basically kind of it in a nutshell, right? You're training deep to superficial. There's lots of cars because those are communicating back and forth between the brain. And then load in what you want to do, which is what we're doing, which is that strength stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I say this a lot, but I think the best way to think about this training is that this training where you're incorporating these other components that are often neglected in traditional training programs is helping you develop all of the qualities that we think we're getting when we go to the gym to work out. And a lot of the time we are missing certain things. So this really just encompasses all of those things that you need to have a healthy, long-lasting body, but also actually make progress and have that be consistent progress that isn't forcing you to take back steps because your shoulder starts bugging you again or whatever those usual things that we run into, whether that's from training or just getting older, because those are also the same kind of principles work the same way just from aging and not training. This really just resolves all of that.
Yeah, and then not to be like sales pitchy because that's annoying, but people are always really interested in results. And honestly, that's the reason we're doing this. Like if we've been playing around with this and we weren't getting better results than anything else that we've ever done, there's no way we would continue to play around with it. There's nothing in it for us. Like we're just trying to optimize what we're doing because we feel better about that than not. And also how it works on us. Like we use this when we train and we wouldn't go any other way. And ever since they evolved to this next level of the internal strength model, we tried it out. And again, I couldn't imagine training any other way. And so what we hear from our clients is basically like, I can't believe how much better I feel after each training session. So just immediately at the end of a session, your body feels way different. The way that it's warmed up is no longer really a warm up. You just progress through the tissue layers with your training. You're just training.
The warm up is training.
It's all training. Yeah, it's not some wasted like shit just trying to get your blood flow going. where you're still missing the deeper tissues. Like if you ever think about trying to warm up for a set of squats and you're doing like leg swings and lunges and side banded monster walks and all kinds of stuff, you start squatting and you still feel like you have to squat 20 sets before you finally get warm. That's because you're not addressing that joint layer at all. And so those tissues are still untouched and they're not warm, and they don't appreciate those squats until you've been doing them for so long. They're finally like, fine.
Your fifth set is when you feel warmed up.
Yeah. So it just feels different. And then the response to the training is also different. The volume is a lot lower. The intensity is high for the most part, but we place the intensity, we try to sprinkle it where it should go and not have it everywhere all the time on all things, because certain tissue can only adapt so much. So for example, you're not going to squat or do a squat type movement every time you train your legs multiple days a week, because that's too much. Like you
don't need that much to make progress.
You don't. And so we had a hard time initially with the volume, thinking like, oh, is this going to work? And it's kind of amazing how well it works. So anyways, people are feeling way less beat up from this stuff. Lots of, nagging long-term issues have been resolved. We get messages all the time from people telling us like, I'm finally able to do this again, and this doesn't hurt anymore, and thank you so much. And now I get it. And some people initially have a hard time with those exercises that are addressing capsule and rotation and doing the cars, because they don't recognize them. And so they just kind of put them in the like, what is all this mobility prep stuff? But it's all training, and you'll get used to it if you start to follow the ISM. It's still training. It is training, and it should be hard if it's supposed to be hard or intended to be hard, just as hard as your squat is.
Yeah, it's a better way to think about it is that it's all of the same principles that we use to make a deadlift strong and a squat strong traditionally, but it's either focused on very specific movement qualities of a joint or specific tissue in your body, as opposed to lots of joints, lots of tissue together. It's just either very focused on one area or it's spread apart across multiple areas, but it is the same principles, which does look really different when you're used to traditional training. That's probably one of the hardest parts for people is getting into this is, for this actual traditional strength work that you're used to doing, we want to do the absolute most minimal effective dose to make an adaptation, because we have this other stuff that we want adaptations on too. So we have to be strategic about where we're putting all that energy, because that's really what it comes down to. And your body only has so much energy to adapt. So, I think it for somebody who's not used to it, it does feel really, really different. And the results are also really different. And that's sort of what it takes. If you want to have all those things that we want from training, like have your cake and eat it too, we have to approach training differently. And that's what this does.
Yeah. The goal should always be like, there should never be any point in your training lifespan that you want everything to fall apart and feel like shit and prevent you from being able to train, so you have to organize your training structure in the moment to think about that. Like this, I need to take care of all of these things, and you have to really understand what these movements are doing, what's the benefit, but what's the trade-off, and then what is there that I can do about this trade-off. And then also like, how can I mitigate damage? And a lot of that following traditional exercises and doing proper form, when you've never really analyzed the body that's actually doing them, that's a crapshoot. You have no idea like how the function of these joints that you're putting into this exercise, they might be like ready to go, but you haven't checked them out.
Yeah, because good form is only relative to the body that's doing that form, because some people can have what would be classically considered bad form, but they have a lot of joint range of motion and a lot of connective tissue health, and they have those qualities that allow them to move outside of what we consider perfect patterns, and those are totally good training stimuluses for them. It really comes down to just whose body we're dealing with, and with this training, it is a generalized program that lots of different people are doing, but when you're training to develop the function of a healthy joint, you can have 10 people doing this kind of stuff who have 10 different hips, but they're all training at their relative end ranges and they're improving those qualities, so it becomes individualized in that regard, which is really cool, because that just lets you have more training options. Your body's going to be more resilient doing anything that you want to do physically. So
yeah, and in the generalized program, we're trying to work in we're trying to work in the ability to individualize it as best we can. We've uploaded a self-assessment in there. There are little tidbits, but you're always welcome to book an individual session with us in addition to doing that program so that we can really help you figure out what's better for you to be doing or not doing. And then if you really want to get things to be ideal, it's personalized programming, where we really make sure that your program is, keeping you on track. But you will, I think that even just with the general stuff, like it's so much far beyond and better what a normal strength and conditioning program does. Sorry, strength and conditioning, I love you, but we're still doing it.
We're doing
just
strength and conditioning.
adding the things that have been missing from it to make it better for you, basically. So it still is strength and conditioning. It still is hypertrophy. It still is bodybuilding. It still is strongman stuff. It just is that like understanding what's happening and then how to like train all of the things in the right way to make sure that it's forward progress for everything as best you can.
Yep. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's a lot of information. But if you have questions on that or you want help navigating what would be the best option, we really, like Sarah mentioned, we have a lot of options from the monthly program all the way to full customized programming, assessments, nutrition stuff. She does that as well.
Personal training within that, however many times you want, is optional as well.
We want to help you figure it out, so let us know.
Yes.
Thanks for watching.